You've been confidently wrong about your own body your entire life, not about complicated stuff, about the basics. Here are 42 so-called facts that are complete nonsense. 1. You've been told your entire life that you're only using 10% of your brain, implying there's some vast, untapped neural reserve waiting to be unlocked by the right podcast, supplement, or motivational speaker. This is one of the most successful lies ever told about human biology. Brain imaging technology, fMRI and PET scans, consistently shows activity distributed across virtually all brain regions, not some sad, dormant, 90% sitting idle in the dark. The myth likely came from a misinterpreted early neuroscience research and the fact that only about 10% of brain cells are neurons, with the rest being glial cells that people wrongly dismissed as filler. Except they aren't filler, they're essential. From an evolutionary standpoint, the brain burns roughly 20% of your total energy despite being only 2% of your body weight. Evolution is ruthless about waste. An organ that was 90% idle would have been abandoned millions of years ago. Self-help culture weaponized this myth to sell optimization programs, implying you're one seminar away from genius. You're not. You're already using your whole brain. You're just choosing to fill it with bad information about your brain, which is a genuinely impressive use of the full 100%. 2. Sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch. 5 senses, memorized in childhood, apparently settled forever. This is a simplification so severe it borders on deliberate misinformation. Humans have somewhere between 8 and 21 distinct senses depending on how you define the term, and the classic 5-sense framework is a relic of ancient philosophy, not modern neuroscience. Proprioception is your sense of where your body parts are in space without looking. Try touching your nose with your eyes closed. That's not one of the 5. Interoception monitors internal states: hunger, thirst, heart rate, bladder fullness, nausea. Entirely separate system. The vestibular sense governs balance and spatial orientation via the inner ear and is completely distinct from hearing. Thermoception detects temperature changes. Nociception processes pain. Neither fits neatly into the category of touch, no matter how generously you define it. The 5-sense model traces directly back to Aristotle, a genuinely brilliant thinker operating without a microscope, nerve conduction studies, or any modern neuroscience whatsoever. He did his best. We then ran with his incomplete framework for over 2,000 years without questioning it, which says considerably more about us than it does about him. 3. Everyone knows the heart is on the left. You put your hand over your left chest during national anthems. You clutch the left side dramatically in every movie medical emergency. You have been performing this gesture your entire life with confident anatomical incorrectness. The heart is almost entirely in the center of your chest, slightly tilted left. It is not parked on the left side like a piece of misplaced furniture that someone never got around to moving. The heart sits in the mediastinum, the central compartment of the chest cavity nestled between both lungs. The apex, the pointed bottom tip, angles toward the lower left, and that's where the strongest heartbeat impulse is felt against the chest wall. That small tilt became the entire myth. A rare condition called dextrocardia, occurring in roughly 1 in 12,000 people, places the heart mirrored to the right with no health consequences at all, which further proves the heart has no structural obligation to one side. Chest compression guidelines for CPR target the center of the sternum because that's where the heart actually lives. You've been dramatically grabbing the wrong location in every emotional moment of your adult life. Your heart has been sitting in the middle this whole time, watching you perform. 4. Don't go outside without a hat. You lose 90% of your body heat through your head. A cornerstone of concerned parental advice, delivered with the certainty of someone who once read something somewhere. Your head loses heat in proportion to its surface area, which is roughly 10% of your body. It therefore loses about 10% of your heat, not 90%. Exactly what basic physics would predict if anyone had bothered to check. The myth is widely traced to a United States military field manual from the 1950s that misinterpreted a cold weather study where soldiers in Arctic conditions were given insulated suits but no hats. Of course, their heads lost the most heat. It was the only exposed part of their bodies. Researchers measured the exposed part losing the most heat and somehow concluded the head was uniquely responsible. If the 90% claim were biologically true, wearing a hat while otherwise naked in a blizzard would keep you warm. It would not. Heat loss is proportional to exposed surface area and local blood flow, not some special head-specific thermal drain. Your head is not a chimney. Cover your whole body in the cold like a rational organism, and stop treating a hat as a full thermal strategy. 5. Stop reading in dim light, or you'll ruin your eyes. Delivered by every parent and teacher with the confident authority of people who definitely did not consult a single ophthalmologist. Reading in low light causes temporary eye strain and fatigue. It causes zero permanent damage. None. The American Academy of Ophthalmology has explicitly stated there is no scientific evidence that reading in dim light causes any lasting harm to eye structure or visual acuity whatsoever. The strain you feel is caused by the ciliary muscles working harder to focus in suboptimal conditions, identical to any other muscle fatigue after extra effort. The symptoms are real: tired eyes, temporary blurring, mild headache. They resolve completely with rest, exactly like tired legs after a long walk. The myth likely persisted because the symptoms feel alarming and, more importantly, because parents needed a compelling reason to get children to stop reading past bedtime. It was disciplinary fiction promoted to the status of medical fact through sheer repetition. Your eyes were fine. Your parents were tired. These are two separate and unrelated problems, and your vision was never part of the equation. 6. Dinosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago, long before humans arrived, and we missed them entirely. Except you are currently surrounded by living dinosaurs, and one probably tried to steal your food recently. The scientific consensus since the 1970s is that birds are theropod dinosaurs. Not dinosaur relatives, not dinosaur descendants, in a loose metaphorical sense, but actual dinosaurs within the same evolutionary lineage as creatures with names you recognize from museum exhibits. Phylogenetically, a pigeon is more closely related to a large predatory theropod than the theropod is to a stegosaurus. The scientific term non-avian dinosaurs was coined specifically because researchers needed a way to reference the extinct members of the group without implying birds somehow don't count. They count. There are approximately 10,000 living species of dinosaur on Earth right now. They have feathers, they build nests, and several of them are bold enough to approach you directly at outdoor dining establishments. You've spent your whole life feeling like you missed something spectacular, when the actual situation is that you've been casually coexisting with theropod dinosaurs your entire life and calling them pigeons. 7. Your stomach acid is so powerful it can dissolve almost anything. A vat of biological acid capable of processing whatever you throw at it. Your stomach is genuinely impressive chemistry, but it is not a universal disposal unit, and plenty of things pass through it completely unchanged. Gastric acid is primarily hydrochloric acid, with a pH of roughly 1.5 to 3.5, making it highly corrosive and capable of denaturing proteins and killing most pathogens before they reach the intestines. However, many plastics, certain plant fibers, and specific medications pass through entirely undigested. The stomach is a selective processor operating within time and chemical constraints, not an incinerator running at full capacity on everything you consume. The stomach lining itself must produce a continuous protective mucus layer to avoid digesting its own walls. And when that system fails, which it does, the result is an ulcer. Your stomach is essentially corrosive enough to damage itself and must actively prevent that outcome every single moment of your life. It's a serious piece of biochemical engineering with very specific operating parameters and a surprisingly fragile relationship with its own product. 8. Hair and nails keep growing after death. A creepy universal fact repeated at sleepovers, referenced in horror films, mentioned casually by people who have clearly never spent 3 seconds examining the underlying biology. They do not grow, not even fractionally. What happens is that skin dehydrates after death and physically retracts, making existing hair and nails appear longer. An optical shift, not biological growth. Growth requires active cellular metabolism, glucose, ATP, blood supply, hormonal signaling. All of this stops completely at death. There is no mechanism by which a dead cell manufactures new protein and extends a hair shaft. Forensic researchers studying decomposition timelines documented this as a measurable optical illusion decades ago. The skin around the nail bed shrinks by several millimeters as it desiccates and loses moisture, exposing portions of the nail that were previously covered, creating the visual impression of growth of up to several millimeters. The same retraction effect applies to beard stubble. The skin pulls back, the hair shaft doesn't advance. Dead bodies aren't growing, they are shrinking. Whether that information is deeply reassuring or considerably worse than the myth depends entirely on the kind of person you are. 9. You are a human being. Your body is made of human cells performing human functions. This much seems completely obvious until you look at the actual numbers, at which point the concept of you becomes genuinely complicated. By cell count, you are approximately half microbial. A widely cited 2016 study revised earlier estimates, placing the ratio of bacterial to human cells at roughly 1:1, approximately 38 trillion bacterial cells to 30 trillion human cells. The human genome contains approximately 20,000 protein-coding genes. The collective microbiome encodes an estimated 2 to 20 million additional genes performing biological functions your genome simply cannot execute independently. Gut microbiota influence digestion, regulate immune function, produce neurotransmitters, including roughly 90% of the body's serotonin, and have documented effects on mood and cognitive function. You cannot sterilize yourself of these organisms and survive. They are not passengers tolerating your existence. They are cooperators running critical systems. You are not a person who happens to have microbes. You are a walking, self-maintaining ecosystem that also has opinions, forms attachments, and has developed a complicated relationship with its phone. 10. Veins are blue, therefore deoxygenated blood is blue, and it only turns red when it meets oxygen. Shown in diagrams, taught in classrooms, printed in textbooks, and completely wrong. Your blood is red, all of it, every milliliter. It has never been blue inside your body at any point during your life. Hemoglobin in red blood cells binds to oxygen in the lungs and becomes bright red, oxyhemoglobin. When it releases oxygen to tissues, it becomes a darker, deeper red, deoxyhemoglobin, not blue, a darker red. The veins appear blue or greenish through the skin because of optical physics. Longer wavelengths of light, the red end of the spectrum, penetrate deeper into tissue and get absorbed, while shorter wavelengths toward the blue end scatter back toward the surface and reach your eyes. You are seeing a light scattering artifact through several layers of tissue, not the actual color of what's inside. The only vertebrate with genuinely blue blood is the horseshoe crab, which uses copper-based hemocyanin instead of iron-based hemoglobin. Medical diagrams use blue to represent deoxygenated blood for visual contrast and clarity. Entire generations absorb this color-coding convention as anatomical truth. Your veins have been red the whole time. 11 8 hours of sleep. Non-negotiable, universal, the perfect prescription for all 8 billion people on Earth regardless of age, genetics, lifestyle, or individual biology. 8 hours is a population average derived from large-scale sleep studies, not a biological law handed down from a governing body of physiology. The National Sleep Foundation recommends 7 to 9 hours for adults, a 2-hour range, because the research shows meaningful individual variation that a single number cannot capture. A documented subset of people carry a gene variant called HDC2 that allows full cognitive function on 6 hours or fewer with no measurable deficit. These are natural short sleepers, and they're not running on the hidden reserves. They genuinely require less. Sleep architecture matters as much as duration. The ratio of deep sleep, REM cycles, and light sleep stages affects cognitive performance significantly. Fragmented 8-hour sleep routinely performs worse than consolidated 6.5 hours in cognitive testing. The cultural fixation on exactly 8 hours appears partly rooted in the 19th century labor movement's 8 hours labor, 8 hours recreation, 8 hours rest slogan, a workers' rights framework that biology was never consulted on. Your body has its own number. It has been trying to tell you what it is. 12, sweet at the tip, bitter at the back, salty and sour on the sides. The tongue map. Printed in biology textbooks, memorized by students for generations, possibly still on a laminated poster in a school somewhere with tiles from the 1980s. This map is based on a mistranslation error from 1901 that spent the better part of a century inside formal education before being definitively corrected. German scientist D.P. Hanig published a paper noting subtle, minor regional variation in taste sensitivity at the tongue's edges. An American researcher later misread and dramatically exaggerated these small differences into rigid, clearly delineated zones, and the diagram went into print. All taste receptor cells, responding to sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami, are distributed across the entire tongue surface. There are no zones, there never were zones. A fifth primary taste, umami, was identified in 1908 by Japanese chemist Kikunai Ikeda, but the tongue map never included it. A significant gap that should have made people suspicious of the entire framework far sooner. For over a century, educators confidently taught a diagram built on a translation error. The whole tongue tastes everything. It has been doing this the entire time, completely unbothered by the map. 13. The appendix does nothing useful. It's evolution's junk drawer, a vestigial leftover whose only notable contribution to your existence is its capacity to become infected and require emergency surgery. This characterization is now understood to be wrong. The appendix is an active component of the immune system and a probable reservoir for beneficial gut bacteria, and it has the evolutionary track record to prove it. Research published in the Journal of Evolutionary Biology found that the appendix has evolved independently in mammals over 30 separate times across different lineages. Evolution does not repeatedly develop a structure in unrelated species if that structure confers no advantage. The appendix is lined with lymphoid tissue and appears to play a role in immune function, particularly during early life and following gastrointestinal illness that wipes out intestinal bacteria. The leading hypothesis is that it functions as a biological reserve, a protected storage site for beneficial gut microbes that can repopulate the digestive system after a severe illness clears the intestinal environment. People who've had appendectomies show a slightly elevated incidence of certain intestinal infections, which is consistent with this theory. The organ you've spent your life calling useless has been quietly running backup operations this whole time, with the worst public relations record in the history of medicine. 14. Humans have chins. Other animals don't. This one isn't even taught. It just sits quietly in the background, never questioned, because questioning whether you have a chin seems like a bizarre use of anyone's afternoon. But the anatomically distinct human chin, the bony protrusion at the base of the mandible with no clear mechanical function, is genuinely unique to modern Homo sapiens, and nobody is entirely sure why it exists. Every other primate jaw slopes straight back below the teeth. Neanderthals, despite being extraordinarily close genetic relatives and possessing very robust jawbones, did not have chins. Their mandibles angled back below the tooth line. The function of the human chin remains actively debated among researchers. Proposed explanations include structural reinforcement against chewing stress, sexual selection, or a developmental byproduct of jaw shape changes during the evolutionary reduction of facial size. A 2015 study from the University of Iowa found a little support for the mechanical stress hypothesis, suggesting the chin may be a non-adaptive byproduct of other facial changes rather than a feature selected for a specific purpose. You have a feature that no other creature on Earth possesses, whose evolutionary purpose researchers still cannot fully agree on, and you have spent your entire life taking it completely for granted. 15. Stop going to the gym and all that muscle converts directly into fat. Skip training long enough and you'll wake up with the tissues rearranged into something softer and less useful. Muscle and fat are two entirely different tissue types with different cellular structures, different metabolic profiles, and different functions. One cannot convert into the other any more than your liver can decide to become a kidney. Muscle tissue is constructed from protein-based contractile fibers, actin and myosin, organized into structures designed for generating force. Adipose tissue is made of lipid-storing cells with an entirely different architecture and purpose. They share no conversion pathway. What actually happens when someone stops training is this. Muscle atrophies through disuse, losing mass and protein content, while fat accumulates separately if caloric intake doesn't adjust to match the reduced energy expenditure. The visual correlation, former athletes appearing to gain fat in regions where muscle previously was, is why the myth is so persistent and convincing. The geography looks familiar even though the biology is completely different. Your muscle isn't betraying you by becoming fat, it's leaving because you stopped using it. The fat moved in afterward because you kept eating like the muscle was still there. 16. Sweat it out. Purge the toxins through your pores. Hot yoga, saunas, sweat lodges. All built on the premise that perspiration is your body's natural drainage system for accumulated waste, flushing out the chemical damage of modern living. Sweat's primary function is thermoregulation. It cools your body through evaporation. It is not a meaningful toxin elimination pathway, and treating it like one is a misunderstanding of basic physiology. Sweat is approximately 99% water, with trace amounts of salt, small quantities of urea, ammonia, and lactic acid. Real metabolic byproducts, but in quantities so negligible they represent a fraction of what the liver and kidneys process continuously. If you had to rely on sweat to manage your actual metabolic waste load, you would be in multi-organ failure. The word toxins in wellness marketing is almost always deliberately undefined, because the moment you name a specific compound, the science of how the body eliminates it becomes deeply inconvenient for the product being sold. Heavy sweating can temporarily concentrate certain compounds in the bloodstream by reducing fluid volume faster than solutes are expelled, the opposite of detoxification. Your kidneys are handling the actual work. They haven't asked for a single sauna session. 17. Creative people are right-brained. Analytical people are left-brained. You have probably been told which type you are at some point, and there are personality quizzes on the internet prepared to confirm whichever answer you wanted. The left brain, right brain personality framework is Neuromyth, a pop science fabrication with no meaningful basis in how brains actually function in living people. It's true that certain functions show lateralization tendencies. Language processing skews left in most right-handed people, and some spatial tasks show a right hemisphere lean. These are tendencies in specific tasks, not global personality determinants. A large 2013 study from the University of Utah analyzed brain connectivity in over 1,000 people and found no evidence of individuals consistently favoring one hemisphere's networks over the other. The corpus callosum is a dense band of roughly 250 million nerve fibers connecting the hemispheres, facilitates constant, rapid communication between both sides. The brain does not operate in segregated hemispheric personality modes. The myth gained enormous cultural momentum in the 1970s, following Nobel Prize-winning split-brain research that the popular press then wildly overstated. You don't have a dominant brain hemisphere. You have one brain, and it has been using both sides to enthusiastically believe this myth. 18. Stop cracking your knuckles. You're going to get arthritis. Stated with absolute medical conviction by people who have never reviewed a single study on the subject. There's no credible scientific evidence linking habitual knuckle cracking to any form of arthritis. The sound is produced by the rapid collapse of gas-filled bubbles, primarily carbon dioxide and nitrogen, in the synovial fluid surrounding the joint through a process called tribonucleation. No structural damage to the joint occurs during this process. A physician named Dr. Donald Unger committed to one of the more specific self-experiments in medical history. He deliberately cracked the knuckles of only his left hand for 60 years while leaving his right hand as a controlled comparison. He found no difference in arthritis development between the hands and published his findings in the journal Arthritis and Rheumatism in 2009, earning him an Ig Nobel Prize for the effort. Larger studies examining habitual knuckle crackers versus non-crackers have found no correlation with arthritis incidence. There is some limited evidence suggesting very prolonged cracking over decades may be associated with minor swelling, but this remains weak and inconsistently replicated. One man ran a 60-year personal clinical trial on his own hands to settle this. The Knuckles 1. 19. Every 7 years, your body completely replaces itself at the cellular level. You are literally a different person on a 7-year cycle. Clean, poetic, biologically tidy. Different cells turn over at completely different rates. Several never turn over at all, and every 7 years is an average so broad it functionally means nothing about any specific tissue in your body. Gut lining cells are replaced every 2 to 5 days. Red blood cells last approximately 120 days. Liver cells turn over every 12 to 18 months. Fat cell nuclei replace approximately every 8 years, though the lipid content within them fluctuates far more rapidly. Neurons in the cerebral cortex last a lifetime. The same neurons firing in your brain right now were present in your infancy. You are not getting new cortical neurons. Cardiomyocytes, the heart muscle cells, turn over at roughly 1% per year, meaning you still carry heart cells from childhood well into your 40s. The 7-year figure appears to have emerged from averaging multiple cell types into a single number and then watching that number get simplified and repeated until it sounded like biology. Some of your cells are brand new. Some are original factory equipment you have never replaced. You are not a renovation. You are a patchwork running on mixed schedules. 206 bones. The universal answer. Listed in every anatomy resource, printed on every biology exam, stated with the confidence of a fact that requires no further examination. 206 is the average count for a typical adult skeleton. But the actual number varies between individuals, and a meaningful percentage of people are walking around with a different total and have no idea. Sesamoid bones, embedded within tendons like the patella, vary in number between individuals, with some people carrying additional sesamoids in their hands and feet. Sutural bones, small, irregular bones that can form within the skull's connective seams, vary widely in number across individuals and populations. Newborns arrive with approximately 270 to 300 bones, many of which fuse during childhood and adolescence, arriving at around 206 by early adulthood. But the exact count at fusion varies. Cervical ribs, extra ribs developing from neck vertebrae, occur in approximately 0.5% to 1% of the population, giving those individuals more bones than the standard count. 206 is the skeletal equivalent of saying the average household has 2.4 children, statistically derived, individually variable, and nobody actually has the decimal. 21, you're born with all the brain cells you'll ever have, and they die off from that point forward. Every bad decision, every rough night, every year of aging is just subtraction from a fixed, non-renewable supply. This was neuroscience consensus for most of the 20th century, and it is wrong. Neurogenesis, the production of new neurons, occurs in the adult human brain. It is limited in scope, but it is real and documented. Adult neurogenesis has been confirmed in at least 2 regions, the hippocampus, which is critical for memory formation and learning, and the olfactory bulb. Research using carbon-14 dating of neurons, exploiting the atmospheric signature left by nuclear weapons, testing to precisely date when cells were born confirmed that hippocampal neurons are being generated throughout adult life. Exercise is the most robustly documented stimulator of adult hippocampal neurogenesis, primarily through increasing a protein called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which promotes the growth and survival of new neurons. Chronic stress and alcohol appear to suppress neurogenesis, which may partly explain their long-term cognitive effects, though neither eliminates the process entirely. Your brain is still capable of manufacturing new components under the right conditions. It would benefit significantly from a walk and considerably less from being told it's running out of parts. 22. Humans live the longest. We've conquered disease, developed medicine, extended the average lifespan across centuries of progress, and claimed the top position on the animal longevity leaderboard. We don't crack the top 10, and some species make our best efforts look genuinely embarrassing by comparison. The Greenland shark is estimated to live over 400 years, with some specimens potentially exceeding 500. It reaches sexual maturity at approximately 150 years of age, meaning it spends more time as a juvenile than any human civilization has existed in its current form. The ocean quahog clam can live over 500 years. One specimen, later nicknamed Ming, was estimated at 507 years old at the time of its discovery. Bowhead whales routinely exceed 200 years, with 19th century harpoon fragments recovered from living animals, confirming lifespans that predate modern nations. The immortal jellyfish can biologically revert to its juvenile state after reaching sexual maturity, potentially cycling indefinitely through its life stages. You think reaching 90 is a remarkable achievement. There are clams at the bottom of the ocean that have been there since before the printing press, and they are still filtering water without complaint. 23. The skin is the largest organ in the human body. Standard anatomy, settled science, end of discussion. Except, the discussion has not ended, and the answer depends entirely on which metric you're using and whether you're accounting for what researchers have recently found hiding in the spaces between everything else. A 2018 paper in the journal Scientific Reports formally proposed the interstitium as a distinct organ, a network of fluid-filled spaces within connective tissue running throughout the body beneath the skin, around organs, and within the walls of the digestive system. These spaces had been consistently overlooked because standard tissue preparation techniques for microscopy collapsed them, making them invisible until researchers preserved tissue in a way that maintained the structure. By volume, the interstitial fluid system may exceed the skin's mass. The skin itself weighs approximately 3.5 to 10 kilograms, depending on body size, and covers roughly 1.5 to 2 square meters. Its measurements are a range, not a fixed figure. The gut lining, if fully unfolded, has a surface area estimated at approximately 30 square meters by some calculations, which substantially exceeds the skin's surface area as an alternative candidate for largest. Scientists found an entire organ hiding in the spaces between everything else, and the skin conversation had to start over. 24. Emotional crying is uniquely human. Our tears in response to grief, joy, fear, or frustration set us apart from all other species. This is stated with a certainty that significantly exceeds the available scientific evidence, and the confidence is partly a product of the difficulty of studying emotional states in nonverbal animals rather than a confirmed anatomical uniqueness. All mammals produce basal tears to lubricate and protect the eyes. Reflex tears occur across species in response to irritants. The question of emotional tears is far more complicated. Elephants have been documented producing secretions from their temporal glands during situations of apparent distress. But whether this is functionally analogous to human emotional weeping remains scientifically unresolved. The core problem is definitional. Confirming emotional tears requires both a measurable tear response and a verified emotional state. Establishing the latter in a nonverbal species is extraordinarily difficult with current methods. Some researchers argue the claim reflects the limitations of animal cognition research more than a confirmed biological distinction. We declared ourselves the only emotional weepers primarily because we couldn't ask anyone else about their experience. Science is steadily making that conclusion less comfortable to hold. 25. Every drink destroys neurons permanently. You are literally dissolving your brain one glass at a time. This particular claim served a generation of anti-drinking lectures and is not precisely accurate about what alcohol actually does to neural tissue. Alcohol does not directly kill neurons in the amounts consumed recreationally, at least not through the blunt mechanism the myth implies. Research shows that alcohol primarily damages dendrites, the branching extensions that neurons use to communicate with each other, rather than destroying the cell body itself. This disrupts connectivity without necessarily killing the cell. Chronic, heavy drinking does cause measurable brain atrophy and cell death, but primarily through indirect mechanisms: thiamine deficiency leading to Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, sustained neuroinflammation, and the neurotoxic effects of metabolic byproducts accumulated over time. Alcohol also impairs the hippocampus's ability to consolidate new memories during intoxication, which is why you wake up without recollection of specific events while retaining everything from before, without destroying existing cells in the process. The cells aren't being killed in those moments. The recording function is being temporarily disabled. Alcohol isn't eliminating your brain cells, it's cutting communication lines and slowly starving the system of what it needs to maintain itself. Arguably worse than the myth, just considerably less quotable. 26, if you're cold, cover up anywhere. All parts of the body lose heat at roughly equal rates, so any insulation contributes the same amount to keeping you warm. Heat loss from the human body is dramatically non-uniform, and certain regions function as biological radiators, while others are relatively well insulated by design. The hands, feet, ears, and nose. Extremities with high surface area to volume ratios and blood vessels running close to the skin lose heat far more rapidly per unit of area than the torso or thighs. The body's thermoregulatory response prioritizes core temperature by restricting blood flow to the extremities through vasoconstriction, which is why your hands go cold and lose dexterity before your core temperature drops in a cold environment. Wet skin loses heat up to 25 times faster than dry skin at the same temperature due to evaporative cooling, which explains why wind and moisture together create genuinely dangerous conditions at temperatures that might otherwise seem manageable. In treating hypothermia, medical protocols prioritize warming the groin and armpits because major blood vessels run close to the surface in those regions, and warming them efficiently returns warm blood to the core circulation. Your body is not a uniform heat-emitting structure. It's an architecture of radiators and insulators, and misunderstanding that difference in cold conditions has a documented body count. 27. Normal body temperature is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Deviation means something is wrong. This number is universal, precise, and medically definitive. It came from a single 19th century study and may already be biologically outdated for the current human population. The 98.6 standard was established from German physician Karl Funderlich's measurements, taken from approximately 25,000 patients in the 1850s, averaged into a single reference number using thermometers that were likely not calibrated to modern standards. A Stanford study published in 2020 analyzed temperature data across 3 time periods spanning 1860 to 2017 and found that average American body temperature has decreased by approximately 0.05 degrees Fahrenheit per decade, a statistically meaningful downward trend over time. Normal body temperature also varies by individual, time of day, age, sex, and measurement site. Rectal measurements run highest, oral in the middle, and axillary armpit measurements run lowest. The clinical normal range used by most physicians is 97 to 99 degrees Fahrenheit, a full 2-degree span surrounding the single number everyone memorized. The universal medical benchmark for your temperature was derived from a 19th century German study with imprecise equipment, and the average has apparently been drifting downward since before anyone noticed. 28. Memory is memory. You either remember something or you don't. The brain stores experiences and facts and retrieves them on demand, like a well-organized archive you carry everywhere. Human memory is a collection of multiple distinct systems processed in different brain regions, operating under completely different rules, and occasionally producing contradictory outputs from the same event. Explicit declarative memory divides into episodic memory for the personal events and semantic memory for facts and general knowledge, both dependent on the hippocampal function. Implicit procedural memory, how to ride a bicycle, type, play an instrument, is stored in the cerebellum and basal ganglia and operates entirely independently of conscious recall. The famous neurological patient known as HM, who had his hippocampus surgically removed, could learn new motor skills through practice while retaining zero conscious recollection of the practice sessions that produced that learning. Two separate systems, running in the same brain with no access to each other's records. Working memory is a distinct temporary system with a limited capacity. It's what holds a phone number for 10 seconds before it evaporates. Emotional memory processed through the amygdala is particularly durable and can be triggered independently of any conscious episodic recall. Your memory isn't one hard drive. It's multiple systems running different software, occasionally disagreeing, installed in different rooms, and none of them are as reliable as you think. 29. Taller people have slower heart rates. Bigger body, more distance to cover, the engine runs slower to compensate. This seems logical enough that most people have never paused to question whether it's actually true. There is a modest statistical correlation between height and resting heart rate in large population studies, but it is weak enough that it has no practical predictive value for any specific individual. Heart rate is primarily determined by cardiovascular fitness level, autonomic nervous system tone, age, body composition, and genetics. The relationship between body size and resting heart rate is pronounced and reliable when you compare across species. An elephant runs at roughly 28 beats per minute, a shrew approaches 1500. But that cross-species pattern does not translate meaningfully to height variation within humans. Among people, the height-heart rate correlation is detectable statistically, but explains a small fraction of individual variation. Elite endurance athletes frequently maintain resting heart rates of 40 beats per minute or lower regardless of their height, with some documented cases in the low 30s among highly trained individuals of entirely average stature. You cannot look at a tall person and infer anything reliable about their cardiovascular rhythm. The body size to heart rate rule works across the animal kingdom and essentially falls apart the moment you try to apply it within our species. 30. You are a solid physical object. You take up space, you have mass, you bump into things, and the things yield. The solidity of your existence seems like the most self-evident fact available. By volume, atoms are almost entirely empty space, and the matter in your body is mostly that emptiness organized into something that behaves as though it's solid through electromagnetic force. An atom's nucleus contains essentially all of its mass, but occupies roughly 100,000th of the atom's total volume. If a single atom were scaled to the size of a large sports stadium, the nucleus would be a marble sitting at the center, and the electrons would be somewhere near the outer walls. The electrons that give atoms their apparent size exist as probability distributions, not solid shells with definite surfaces. What you experience as physical solidity, sitting on a chair, pressing your hand against a wall, is electron repulsion between atoms resisting compression. The particles are not touching in any conventional sense. By one calculation, if all the empty space were removed from the atoms of every human being currently alive, all 8 billion of us would compress to approximately the volume of a sugar cube. You are overwhelmingly empty space that has organized itself into something that experiences itself as solid through the physics of electromagnetic resistance. That's either remarkable or profoundly unsettling, and you're welcome to decide which. 31. Wisdom teeth are evolutionary leftovers with no purpose, and removing them is standard, obvious, universally recommended procedure. Take them out before they cause problems. This is practically a rite of passage in several countries, presented as settled dental consensus. Routine prophylactic removal of asymptomatic wisdom teeth, teeth that aren't causing pain, infection, or structural problems, is not supported by evidence across the board, and multiple dental and public health organizations have pulled back from blanket removal recommendations. The American Public Health Association and several European dental bodies have published positions questioning routine extraction of asymptomatic third molars, specifically citing these surgical risks: potential nerve damage, dry socket, complications from anesthesia, and post-operative infection. Approximately 25% of people never develop wisdom teeth at all. Of those who do, a significant proportion never experience impaction or any complication. The crowding problem became more common as human jaws evolved smaller in response to dietary changes. Less time chewing tough, fibrous raw material, but individual variation in jaw size and tooth emergence is enormous. In the United Kingdom and several Nordic countries, watchful waiting for asymptomatic wisdom teeth is the standard clinical guidance. Millions of functional teeth have been surgically removed as preventative measures against problems that were never going to arrive. 32. Shave anything and it grows back thicker, darker, and coarser. Parents warn teenagers. People compare legs before and after. Everyone has noticed it. The observation feels completely irrefutable until you examine what shaving actually does and does not interact with. Shaving cuts the hair shaft above the skin surface. It has no interaction with the follicle beneath the skin, the growth cycle originating in that follicle, or the melanin production determining hair color. The follicle is entirely unaware a blade was involved. What changes is the visual and tactile appearance of the cut end. Unshaved hair tapers naturally to a soft, fine tip through ordinary wear and growth. A freshly shaved hair has a blunt, flat cross-section. It is literally wider at the cut point than at the natural tip would have been, which makes it coarser to the touch and appears darker because you're seeing the denser midsection rather than a tapered, lighter end. Clinical studies measuring hair thickness and pigmentation before and after repeated shaving found no change in either characteristic. One such study appeared in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1928 and has been replicated since. The optical illusion is so entirely convincing that it persisted in common belief for nearly a century after being scientifically addressed. The hair is the same. The geometry of the cut end changed. Your perception did the rest. 33. Food goes in your mouth, drops into your stomach, gets digested. The stomach is the engine room, the place where the processing happens. Where else would it be? The stomach is primarily a storage and initial breakdown chamber. The overwhelming majority of actual nutrient digestion and essentially all meaningful absorption takes place in the small intestine, which most people almost never think about. The stomach's main functions are mechanical churning to break food into smaller particles, protein denaturation through hydrochloric acid, and some initial enzymatic breakdown via an enzyme called pepsin. The stomach does not significantly absorb nutrients. Only water, alcohol, and certain medications cross the stomach, lining directly into the bloodstream. The small intestine, averaging 6 to 7 meters in length, is where carbohydrates, proteins, and fats are fully broken down and absorbed through millions of tiny projections called villi and microvilli that dramatically increase surface area. The liver, gallbladder, and pancreas all contribute enzymes and bile to the small intestinal process, resources the stomach doesn't receive. People who've had portions of their small intestine removed experience severe malnutrition even with a fully functional stomach. Because the stomach was never doing the absorption work in the first place. The stomach is the loading dock. 6 meters of intestine you've never considered is where everything important actually happens. 34, the eye works like a camera. Light enters through the lens, strikes the retina, and produces a faithful representation of the external world. The eye is a sophisticated optical instrument delivering accurate visual data to the brain for processing. The eye as camera analogy fails almost immediately when you examine the actual mechanics of what the visual system delivers and how the brain handles it. The retina contains a blind spot at the point where the optic nerve connects. There are no photoreceptors there, just a gap. Your brain fills that gap in real time with invented visual information extrapolated from the surrounding image. You have a hole in your visual field that you have never once noticed because the brain patches it over constantly without informing you. The fovea, the high-resolution center of vision, covers only approximately 2 degrees of the total visual field. Everything outside that narrow center is significantly lower resolution than it appears. The brain uses memory and predictive processing to populate the periphery with convincing detail that isn't actually being captured with precision. The eye sends electrical signals, not images, to the visual cortex, which then actively constructs a visual experience from that data. Optical illusions work by exploiting the shortcuts in that construction process. Your eyes don't show you reality. They send incomplete data to a brain that builds a high-confidence simulation and presents it to you as the world. 35. Your food isn't enough on its own. You need additional vitamins, extra minerals, supplemental everything. The global supplement industry exists because your diet is fundamentally inadequate and requires outside intervention in pill or powder form to function properly. For most people consuming a reasonably varied diet, supplements primarily produce expensive urine and a sense of having addressed something that didn't need addressing. The global dietary supplement market exceeds $150 billion annually, built largely on the unfounded premise of universal nutritional deficiency in otherwise healthy people. Several large, well-funded randomized controlled trials on popular supplements have returned null or negative results. The SELECT trial found that vitamin E and selenium supplementation increased prostate cancer risk in participants. High-dose beta-carotene supplements increased lung cancer incidence in smokers across multiple studies. Fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K accumulate in body tissue and can reach toxic levels through supplementation, unlike water-soluble vitamins where excess is cleared through urination. Genuine deficiencies requiring supplementation are real and well documented. Vitamin B12 for people avoiding animal products, vitamin D for those with limited sun exposure, folate during pregnancy, iron in specific populations. These are targeted, clinically identified needs. They are not a universal baseline condition. The supplement industry sells the anxiety that your body is perpetually running low. The anxiety is the product. 36. Humans sleep at night and are active during the day. We are daytime creatures by nature. Staying up late is a modern failure of discipline enabled by artificial light. A single consolidated block of nighttime sleep is the natural human pattern, and anything else is a deviation. Chronobiology research and historical evidence both complicate this picture considerably. Historian Roger E. Kirch's research on pre-industrial sleep documented extensive evidence of biphasic sleep patterns. A first sleep of roughly 4 hours, a waking period of 1 to 2 hours used for quiet activity, and a second sleep through to morning. This pattern appears in medical literature, court records, and written accounts across pre-industrial Europe. Suggesting consolidated single-block sleep may be a relatively recent cultural artifact, not an ancient biological default. The spread of gaslighting in the 19th century, followed by electric light, is hypothesized to have shifted and compressed sleep patterns over time. Individual chronotypes, biological preferences for sleep timing, show genuine genetic variation. Evening chronotypes are not lazier or constitutionally broken. They are running a different clock setting encoded in their biology. Studies of contemporary hunter-gatherer populations show sleep timing that shifts seasonally and doesn't conform to a strict dark-to-dawn model either. Being awake at 2 in the morning was, for most of human history, completely unremarkable. 37. Your genes are your destiny. DNA is the fixed code that determines your health outcomes, your vulnerabilities, your cognitive tendencies, your disease risks. It's written into your cells from conception, and the script doesn't change. DNA is not a deterministic script. It is a reference library, and what gets read, when, at what volume, and in response to what signals is shaped by everything that happens to you from development onward. Identical twins share virtually 100% of their DNA and diverge meaningfully over time in disease incidence, personality characteristics, and physical presentation. A direct demonstration that the same genetic code does not produce identical outcomes. Epigenetics describes heritable changes in gene expression that occur without any change to the underlying DNA sequence. Chemical modifications that switch genes on or off based on environmental conditions, stress exposure, dietary patterns, and lived experience. The ENCODE project, published in 2012, found that approximately 80% of the human genome has some biochemical function, dramatically overturning the junk DNA concept and revealing a vast regulatory architecture far beyond the protein coding sequences that previously received all the attention. Gene expression profiles change throughout a single lifetime. The same genome produces different active protein configurations in a developing infant, a middle-aged adult, and an elderly person. Your DNA is the library. Your life determines what gets checked out. 38. What you see, hear, touch, taste, and smell is reality. Your senses are the direct interface between your consciousness and the actual world as it exists. They are windows, not interpretations. Your senses are an edited, species-specific, time-delayed, actively constructed representation of selected environmental signals, not a live feed of objective reality. Visual processing takes approximately 80 to 100 milliseconds, meaning what you experience as now is technically the recent past, with the brain projecting forward to compensate for the lag. The McGurk effect demonstrates that what you hear is altered by what you see. Watching a mouth form one syllable while hearing a different sound produces a third, blended perception that neither audio nor visual input alone would generate. The integration happens involuntarily, outside your control. Humans perceive electromagnetic radiation in a narrow band, roughly 380 to 740 nanometers of visible light, while the full electromagnetic spectrum spans from radio waves to gamma radiation. The overwhelming majority of electromagnetic activity in your environment is entirely invisible to you by biological design. Pain perception is not a passive readout of tissue damage. It is a constructed experience modulated by expectation, emotional context, and prior learning. Your senses are not reporting reality, they are reporting a curated, survival-optimized, slightly delayed version of it, and your brain is filling in the rest. 39. Medicine has mapped the human body comprehensively. We have sequenced the genome, developed imaging technology that can resolve structures at the cellular level and catalog the organs and systems thoroughly. What's left is refinement, not discovery. Researchers are still finding new organs, new systems, and new fundamental mechanisms in the human body in the 21st century, and the pace of basic anatomical discovery has not slowed as much as the confidence of the medical establishment would suggest. The mesentery, a structure connecting the intestines to the abdominal wall, was reclassified as a single continuous organ in 2017 after being described as fragmented, disconnected tissue in anatomy references for decades. The glymphatic system, a network through which cerebrospinal fluid clears metabolic waste from brain tissue during sleep, was formally described in 2013 and is now considered a likely explanation for why sleep deprivation produces measurable cognitive impairment over time. The interstitium was proposed as a distinct organ in 2018 after being missed for so long because standard tissue preparation collapsed it into invisibility. The vagus nerve's role in mood regulation, the function of telocytes, the complexity of fascial tissue, and the full scope of gut-brain signaling are all areas of active fundamental research. You are an ongoing scientific investigation. The map is not finished. 40. Intelligence is the defining human trait, and we sit at the top of the cognitive hierarchy, clearly and demonstrably superior to all other species across every relevant dimension. Intelligence is not a single measurable axis, and in multiple specific cognitive domains, other species outperform humans without contest. Chimpanzees outperform humans on certain short-term visual memory tasks. In laboratory studies, chimps briefly shown, numbers scattered across a screen, can touch them in ascending order faster and more accurately than human subjects given the same task. The cognitive mechanism involved is not fully understood, but the performance gap is consistent and documented. New Caledonian crows manufacture tools through a multi-step process use those tools to retrieve other tools in sequential problem solving, and recognize individual human faces, storing those associations across time and communicating them to other crows. Dogs detect certain cancers through olfaction with accuracy rates exceeding 90% in some studies, a diagnostic capability that required decades of oncology research and expensive technology for humans to approximate instrumentally. The problem is the benchmark. Intelligence was defined by humans using criteria selected by humans, measuring capabilities that humans happen to excel at. Asking whether humans are the smartest species is structurally identical to asking whether fish are the best climbers. The other candidates weren't consulted on the test design, and the results reflect that. 41. You are a contained, independent organism. The environment is out there. Your body is in here. The boundary is your skin, and what's inside it is yours, separate from everything else. The biological boundary between your body and the external world is considerably less definite than a skin surface implies, and the contents of what you consider you are in continuous exchange with the surrounding environment in ways that don't resolve neatly at the dermal layer. You inhale approximately 14,000 liters of air per day, including microparticles, airborne microorganisms, pollutants, and particulate matter that enter the respiratory system and interact with internal chemistry at varying depths. Microplastics, fragments from synthetic materials in the external environment, have been detected in human blood, lung tissue, placental tissue, and breast milk. These are particles from outside the body now present in the body's most protected internal spaces. The gut microbiome is in continuous exchange with the external environment through food, water, and physical contact, and its composition shifts with diet, medication use, geography, stress, and the microbiomes of people you live with. Horizontal gene transfer, the movement of genetic material from bacterial organisms into human cells, has been documented, meaning your genome may contain sequences with no direct ancestral origin. The boundary was always more of a useful administrative line than a biological fact. 42, alive and dead. The clearest binary in nature. Life is the state. Death is its termination, a precise moment where one ends and the other begins. Biologically, death is not a moment. It is a process, and science has spent decades progressively pushing the boundary of what is considered irreversible. Clinical death, the cessation of heartbeat and breathing, and biological death, irreversible cellular breakdown, are distinct conditions with a measurable gap between them, a gap that modern medicine has learned to work within. Therapeutic hypothermia protocols can reduce patient body temperature to a point where heartbeat and brain activity cease, then restore function with neurologically intact outcomes. The binary between alive and dead is suspended, temporarily but genuinely, during those interventions. Individual cells continue metabolic activity for hours after whole organism death. Skin cells remain viable for up to 24 hours post-mortem. Corneal tissue can be transplanted from donors up to 12 hours after death. The cells did not receive the notification at the moment the organism stopped. Consciousness at end of life continues to produce documented phenomena that complicate simple on-off frameworks, and research into those phenomena is ongoing. Death is not a switch. It is a gradient that medicine keeps renegotiating. The most fundamental line you assume nature had drawn clearly turns out to be the same kind of complicated, contested, biologically messy situation as everything else in the body you've been confidently misunderstanding your whole life. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now